The blood-stained snow surrounding Katherine Evans swirled crimson in the fading light of dusk, her delicate breaths forming small clouds that disappeared into the bitter Wyoming winter air. Each inhale was a struggle, each exhale a miracle as her life slowly ebbed away in the silent wilderness of 1876. Jackson Everett pulled his coat tighter around his broad shoulders, his spurs jingling with each step as his horse trudged through the knee-deep snow. The blizzard that had swept through Whispering Pine earlier that day had finally subsided, leaving behind a pristine white landscape that stretched as far as the eye could see. The cattle rancher had been searching for stray livestock when something unusual caught his attention, a splash of color against the endless white. "Hold up, Thunder," Jackson murmured to his chestnut stallion, squinting into the distance. As he drew closer, his heart nearly stopped. It wasn't a wounded animal as he'd initially thought, but a woman young and beautiful despite the blue tinge to her lips and the blood matting her golden hair. "Dear God," he breathed, dismounting with such haste he nearly lost his footing in the deep snow. Falling to his knees beside her, Jackson removed his glove and placed 2 fingers against her neck, searching desperately for a pulse. It was there, but faint, a flickering candle on the verge of being extinguished. The woman couldn't have been more than 22, her face angelic even in her current state. Her clothes were fine but practical, a dark blue traveling dress beneath a fur-lined coat that had been partially ripped open. Near her outstretched hand lay a small leather-bound journal, its pages fluttering in the gentle evening breeze. Jackson's gaze darted around, searching for any sign of a carriage, horse, or companions. Finding none, his jaw clenched in anger. Someone had left her here to die, alone in the merciless cold. Miss, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice gentle despite the rage building inside him. When she gave no response, he carefully gathered her into his arms, cradling her against his chest as if she were made of porcelain. "You're going to be all right," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to reassure her or himself. "I've got you now, I won't let you go." Thunder snorted impatiently as Jackson carefully lifted the unconscious woman onto his saddle before mounting behind her. He wrapped one strong arm around her waist, holding her securely against him as he took the reins with his free hand. "Home, boy, fast as you can," he urged, and the stallion took off through the snow, seeming to understand the urgency of their situation. Jackson's ranch lay 3 miles to the east, a modest but sturdy establishment he'd built with his own hands after returning from the war. As the main house came into view, he called out to his ranch hand who was closing up the barn for the night, "Henry, get Doc Morgan, now." The older man looked up, startled, but upon seeing the limp figure in Jackson's arms, he wasted no time saddling his horse and galloping toward town. Inside the warmth of his home, Jackson laid the woman gently on his bed, working quickly to build up the fire in the hearth. Her skin was ice cold, her breathing shallow. He removed her wet, bloodied clothing with as much propriety as the situation allowed, averting his eyes when necessary, and wrapped her in warm blankets. As he cleaned the wound on her head with a damp cloth, the woman stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering. "You're safe now," Jackson murmured, though he wasn't certain she could hear him. "You're safe, and I promise I won't let anyone hurt you again." In that moment, as her delicate features relaxed slightly at the sound of his voice, Jackson Everett made a silent vow to the stranger in his bed he would protect her, care for her, and find whoever had left her to die in that snowdrift. And when he found them, they would pay dearly for what they'd done. The next hour passed in tense silence as Jackson tended to the mysterious woman, applying a poultice to her head wound and checking regularly for fever. When the door finally burst open, Dr. Samuel Morgan rushed in, medical bag in hand, face red from the cold. "Where is she?" the doctor asked, removing his hat and coat. "In here," Jackson replied, leading him to the bedroom. "Found her half buried in snow about 3 miles west." "Someone left her there, Doc, left her to die." The older man's face darkened as he assessed the woman's condition. "Cowardly business that, let me see her now." Jackson stepped back, allowing the doctor room to work. "Will she live? Can't say for certain yet." Head wound's nasty, but it's the cold that concerns me most. How long was she out there? Hours, at least. The doctor's skilled hands moved methodically over the patient, checking her pulse, examining her pupils, assessing her injuries. She's young and appears healthy otherwise. That's in her favor. Jackson paced the room, hands clenched at his sides. Who would do such a thing? We haven't had stage robberies in these parts for years. Questions for later, the doctor replied, mixing a tonic from his bag. Right now, she needs warmth and rest. Help me get this down her throat carefully now. Together, they managed to administer the medicine, tilting her head back gently as the doctor poured small amounts of the liquid between her pale lips. Some of it trickled down her chin, but she reflexively swallowed most of it. Good sign, the doctor muttered. Reflexes still working. He straightened up, wiping his hands on a cloth. I've done what I can for now. Keep her warm, try to get more medicine in her every few hours. If fever sets in, use cool compresses. I'll return in the morning. And if she wakes? Jackson asked, his eyes not leaving the woman's face. Keep her calm, don't let her move about. That head injury needs time to heal. The doctor packed his bag and donned his coat. And Jackson, he added, his voice softening, prepare yourself for the possibility that she might not wake at all, or if she does, she may not remember what happened. After the doctor left, Jackson pulled a chair beside the bed and settled in for a long night of vigilance. Outside, the temperature dropped further and the wind picked up again, howling around the eaves of the house like a vengeful spirit. Who are you? He whispered to the unconscious woman, gently brushing a strand of golden hair from her forehead. Who did this to you? The leather journal he'd found near her hand lay on the bedside table. Jackson hesitated, torn between respecting her privacy and searching for clues to her identity. In the end, concern won out over propriety. Opening the journal, he found elegant handwriting filling the pages. The most recent entry was dated just 2 days prior. December 15, 1876, arriving in Cheyenne tomorrow. M insists this business venture will secure our future, but I have my doubts. Something in Mr. Blackstone's correspondence strikes me as disingenuous. M dismisses my concerns as womanly intuition, but I've learned to trust my instincts. Should anything happen to me, let it be known that Malcolm promised Blackstone the deeds to father's mining claims. Claims that are rightfully mine, not his to sell. Jackson frowned, reading the passage again. Whoever this woman was, she had been traveling with someone named Malcolm, perhaps a husband or brother, and had suspicions about a business arrangement. Could this Malcolm have attempted to murder her to gain control of her inheritance? A soft moan from the bed pulled Jackson from his thoughts. The woman's eyelids fluttered, and for a brief moment they opened, revealing eyes as blue and deep as a summer sky. They were unfocused, confused, but undeniably beautiful. Where? She whispered, her voice barely audible. You're safe, Jackson said quickly, leaning forward. You're at my ranch outside of Whispering Pine. I found you injured in the snow. She blinked slowly, struggling to comprehend his words. Who? My name is Jackson Everett. I'm a rancher. Can you tell me your name? A look of panic crossed her face, followed by a grimace of pain. I don't. Her eyes rolled back and she slipped into unconsciousness once more. Jackson's heart sank. The doctor had warned this might happen, memory loss from the head injury. He gently tucked the blankets around her and resumed his vigil, the journal in his lap providing the only clues to the mystery that had literally landed on his doorstep. As the night deepened, snow began to fall again, covering the woman's tracks and any evidence of what had happened to her. But Jackson was determined come morning he would ride out to where he'd found her and search for answers. Someone had tried to kill this woman, and he wouldn't rest until he discovered who and why. The mysterious woman's fever broke shortly before dawn. Jackson, who had dozed off in the chair beside her bed, awakened to the sound of her restless movement. Her cheeks were no longer deathly pale but flushed with healthy color, and her breathing had grown stronger. Water, she whispered, her voice scratchy from disuse. Jackson quickly poured water from a pitcher into a glass and supported her head as she drank. Her eyes, those striking blue eyes, were clearer now, though still clouded with confusion. Thank you, she murmured when she'd had enough. You're the man who found me? Yes, madam, Jackson Everett. He set the glass aside. You're on my ranch about 10 miles outside of Whispering Pine. She frowned, wincing as the movement pulled at her head wound. Whispering Pine, Wyoming Territory. That's right. Jackson studied her face. Do you remember your name? A flash of panic crossed her features. Katherine Evans. She closed her eyes, concentrating. I was traveling with someone important. We were going to meet. Her brow furrowed deeper. I can't remember. That's all right, Jackson assured her. Doc Morgan says memory loss is common with head injuries. It might come back in time. Katherine attempted to sit up but fell back with a gasp of pain. What happened to me? Jackson hesitated, unsure how much to tell her. I found you in a snowdrift yesterday evening, about 3 miles from here. You were alone, unconscious, with a bad wound to your head. Alone. Her voice trembled slightly, but I wasn't traveling alone, I was with. She pressed her fingers to her temples. Why can't I remember? Don't force it, Jackson said gently. You need rest to heal. Katherine's eyes suddenly widened. My journal. I had a leather-bound journal, it's safe, Jackson assured her, retrieving it from the bedside table. I found it near you in the snow. She reached for it eagerly, clutching it to her chest with visible relief. Thank you, this is important. Jackson nodded, deciding not to mention that he'd already read some of its contents. Miss Evans, I don't mean to distress you, but I need to ask, do you remember anything about how you ended up in that snowdrift? Were you attacked? Was there an accident? Katherine closed her eyes, her face contorted with the effort of recollection. I remember, arguing, a carriage, someone was very angry. Her eyes snapped open, filled with sudden fear. Malcolm, I was traveling with Malcolm Evans, my cousin. We were arguing about. Her voice trailed off and she shook her head. It's still foggy. Your journal mentioned a business deal, Jackson prompted carefully. Something about mining claims. Katherine's gaze sharpened. You read my journal. Only the last entry, he admitted. I was trying to identify you to find any family who might be searching for you. She seemed to accept this explanation, though her expression remained guarded. My father left me several mining claims in his will, valuable ones. Malcolm has been pressuring me to sell them. Her fingers tightened around the journal. We were traveling to meet a potential buyer in Cheyenne. A man named Blackstone, Jackson asked. Yes, Katherine frowned. How did we get from the road to a snowdrift? There must have been an accident. She trailed off, looking uncertain. Jackson didn't voice his suspicions that the accident might have been deliberate. Katherine was still weak, and accusing her cousin of attempted murder would only upset her further. Instead, he stood and adjusted the blankets around her. Doc Morgan will be back to check on you this morning. Until then, you should try to sleep. Your body needs to heal. Katherine reached out suddenly, grasping his wrist with surprising strength. Mr. Everett, Jackson, thank you for saving my life. The touch of her hand sent an unexpected warmth through Jackson's arm. He found himself staring into those blue eyes, momentarily speechless. Anyone would have done the same, he finally managed. No, she said softly, not anyone. I was nearly buried in snow, barely breathing. You could have ridden past. You didn't. Her grip loosened, but her gaze held him. I won't forget that. Jackson cleared his throat, oddly affected by her gratitude. Get some rest, Miss Evans. I'll be nearby if you need anything. As he left the room, closing the door softly behind him, Jackson acknowledged the strange protective instinct this woman had awakened in him. In just one day, she had gone from a nameless victim to Katherine Evans, a woman with a voice and a story, a woman who might well have been betrayed by her own blood. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, and the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky in soft pinks and golds. Jackson stepped onto the porch, breathing deeply of the crisp morning air as he contemplated his next move. If Katherine's cousin had indeed tried to kill her, he might return to finish the job once he discovered she had survived. Jackson's hand rested on the revolver at his hip, a remnant of his days fighting in the war. He hadn't drawn it in anger for years, but for Katherine Evans, he would break that streak without hesitation. He had made a promise when he found her in that snowdrift he wouldn't let her go. And Jackson Everett was a man of his word. Dr. Morgan arrived shortly after breakfast, his weathered face brightening when he found his patient conscious and coherent. "A remarkable recovery," he pronounced after examining Katherine. "You're a fortunate young woman, Miss Evans. Not many survive a night in these Wyoming winters." "Thanks to Mr. Everett," Katherine said, glancing at Jackson, who stood by the window. The doctor nodded. "Indeed, now that head wound will need time to heal properly. No traveling for at least 2 weeks, preferably longer." 2 weeks. Katherine exclaimed, "But I need to get to Cheyenne." "My cousin will be worried." "Your cousin can wait," Jackson interrupted, more sharply than he intended. "Your health comes first." Something in his tone made Katherine study him more closely. "You don't believe I was simply thrown from a carriage during an accident, do you, Mr. Everett?" The doctor looked between them, sensing the tension. "Perhaps I should step outside." "No, stay," Katherine insisted. "I want to hear what Mr. Everett thinks happened to me." Jackson crossed the room to stand at the foot of the bed. "Miss Evans, when I found you, there were no signs of a carriage accident. No broken wheels, no injured horses, no luggage scattered about. Just you, nearly buried in snow, with a wound that looked more like it came from a blunt instrument than a fall." Katherine's face paled. "You think I was attacked deliberately?" "I think," Jackson said carefully, "that someone with mining claims as valuable as yours might have enemies. Or relatives who stand to gain from your absence." The doctor cleared his throat uncomfortably. "These are serious accusations, Jackson." "They are," Jackson agreed, "which is why I intend to ride into town today and send telegrams to the sheriff in Cheyenne. See if this Malcolm Evans has arrived there, or if he's reported his cousin missing." Katherine's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her journal. "Malcolm and I were raised together after my parents died. He's been like a brother to me. I cannot believe he would." She couldn't finish the sentence. "Perhaps there was someone else traveling with you," Jackson suggested, softening his tone. "A driver, other passengers." Katherine closed her eyes, concentrating. "We hired a driver in Laramie, a man named Silas, I believe. And there was another passenger who joined us at the last minute, a business associate of Malcolm's." Her eyes opened, widening with sudden realization. "William Reed, that was his name. He claimed to be representing Mr. Blackstone's interests." "Did this Reed seem threatening?" the doctor asked. "No, quite the opposite. He was charming, solicitous, particularly to me." Katherine frowned. "Though Malcolm seemed uneasy around him, they argued when they thought I was asleep." Jackson exchanged glances with the doctor. "I'll inquire about both men in my telegrams. In the meantime, Miss Evans, you'll stay here where it's safe." "I'm imposing on your hospitality." "You're not imposing," Jackson insisted. "My home has plenty of room, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, arrives daily to help with cooking and cleaning. She'll be pleased to have another woman in the house." The doctor packed his medical bag, appearing satisfied with the arrangement. "I'll return in 3 days to check your progress, Miss Evans. Until then, rest, plenty of fluids, and those herbal compresses I showed Jackson how to prepare for your head." After the doctor departed, an awkward silence fell between Jackson and Katherine. She fidgeted with the edge of the blanket, seemingly embarrassed by her dependent situation. "Mr. Everett, I have no way to repay your kindness at present. My funds were in my traveling case. I'm not looking for payment," Jackson interrupted, his voice gruff with emotion he hadn't expected to feel. "Just knowing you'll recover is enough." Katherine studied him, her blue eyes penetrating. "You're an unusual man, Jackson Everett," he smiled slightly. "Just a simple rancher, Miss Evans." "Katherine," she corrected him. "After saving my life and opening your home to me, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Katherine," he repeated, liking the way her name felt on his lips. "Then you must call me Jackson." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. In that moment, Jackson realized that finding Katherine Evans in that snowdrift might have changed his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The sound of a wagon approaching broke the spell. Jackson moved to the window, watching as Mrs. Abernathy's buckboard came into view. "That'll be my housekeeper," he explained. "I should warn her about our unexpected guest." Katherine nodded, settling back against the pillows. "Jackson," she called as he reached the door. When he turned, she offered a smile that transformed her face from merely pretty to luminous. "Thank you." For everything. He tipped his head in acknowledgement, unable to form words past the sudden tightness in his throat. As he closed the door behind him, Jackson knew with absolute certainty that he would do whatever necessary to protect Katherine Evans, not just because he'd found her in the snow, but because something about her had awakened a part of his heart he'd thought long dead after the horrors of war. Mrs. Abernathy, a stout woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair perpetually escaping her bun, took the news of Catherine's presence with practical efficiency. "Poor child, left to die in the cold like that," she tutted, immediately setting about preparing a nourishing broth. "Don't you worry, Mr. Everett. Between us, we'll have her back on her feet in no time." Jackson left the women in each other's company while he rode into Whispering Pine to send his telegrams. The small frontier town was bustling despite the recent snow, with cowboys and merchants going about their business as if the white blanket covering everything was merely an inconvenience rather than the deadly force Jackson knew it could be. At the telegraph office, he composed 3 messages. One to the sheriff in Cheyenne inquiring about Malcolm Evans and William Reed, one to the sheriff in Laramie asking about the driver named Silas, and a third to a former Army companion who now worked as a Pinkerton detective in Denver, requesting any information on a businessman named Blackstone connected to mining interests. As Jackson waited for the telegrams to be sent, he became aware of curious glances from several townsfolk. News traveled fast in small communities, and his rescue of a mysterious woman had clearly become the subject of gossip. "Heard you found yourself a half-frozen lady, Everett," drawled a voice behind him. Jackson turned to see Theodore Walsh, owner of the town's largest mercantile and self-appointed town gossip. "Pretty one, I'm told. She's recovering," Jackson replied tersely, not wanting to feed the rumor mill. Walsh was undeterred. Doc Morgan mentioned she had quite the story, something about mining claims and a missing cousin. Jackson's jaw tightened. Dr. Morgan should be more discreet about his patients. "Now, don't be like that," Walsh chuckled. "Small town like ours thrives on interesting tales. We don't get many mysterious beauties stumbling out of snowdrifts." "She didn't stumble," Jackson corrected sharply. "She was left there to die. And I'd appreciate if you'd remind folks of that fact when they're swapping stories over whiskey at the saloon." Walsh's jovial expression sobered. "That's serious, is it?" "That's serious," Jackson confirmed. "So if you hear of any strangers asking about a young woman named Katherine Evans, you let me know immediately." The shopkeeper nodded, suddenly understanding the gravity of the situation. "Will do, Everett, and I'll pass the word to keep an eye out." Jackson thanked him, paid for his telegrams, and headed to the general store to purchase supplies. Katherine would need proper clothing. Her traveling dress was torn and bloodied beyond repair, and additional food for what might be an extended stay. As he loaded his purchases onto his horse, Sheriff Daniel Hayes approached, his weathered face serious beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "Everett," he greeted with a nod. "Heard about your rescue. Got a minute?" Jackson secured his packages before turning to the lawman. "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" "Just wondering if the lady mentioned anything about how she ended up in that snowdrift. We haven't had trouble on that road for some time." Jackson hesitated, unsure how much to share. The sheriff was competent, but overburdened with responsibilities that ranged from breaking up bar fights to tracking rustlers across the county. "She remembers little," he finally said. "Was traveling with her cousin and possibly others to meet a business associate in Cheyenne. Something about mining claims her father left her." The sheriff whistled low. "Mining claims, you say? Those have caused more bloodshed than just about anything except maybe water rights." He adjusted his gun belt thoughtfully. "Want me to ride out with some men, take a look where you found her?" "I'd appreciate that," Jackson admitted. "I was planning to go back myself, but with fresh snow, traces might be harder to find." "We'll head out this afternoon," Hayes promised. "I'll stop by your ranch tomorrow with anything we discover." He paused, studying Jackson's face. "You're taking a personal interest in this woman's welfare, aren't you, Everett?" Jackson met the sheriff's gaze squarely. "I found her barely breathing in the snow, Sheriff. Someone tried to kill her, so yes, I'm taking it personally." Hayes nodded slowly. Just be careful. Pretty women with valuable mining claims tend to attract trouble, and you've had your share of that already. The reference to Jackson's past his wife Sarah's death during a raid on their homestead years ago was subtle but clear. The sheriff was warning him about getting emotionally involved. I appreciate the concern, Jackson replied stiffly. But Katherine Evans needs protection until we figure out who tried to kill her and why. I'm not about to turn my back on someone in need. The sheriff raised his hands placatingly. Never suggested you should, just saying keep your guard up. And maybe keep that colt of yours close at hand. With that warning echoing in his ears, Jackson mounted his horse and headed back to the ranch, scanning the horizon periodically for any signs of pursuit. The peaceful winter landscape belied the danger he sensed was still very real. Someone had tried to silence Katherine Evans permanently. When they discovered she had survived, they might well try again. Upon his return, Jackson found Katherine sitting up in bed, her golden hair brushed and braided by Mrs. Abernathy, who had also helped her into one of Jackson's clean shirts. The oversized garment made her look even more vulnerable, emphasizing her delicate features and the dark bruise that had bloomed along her temple. You're looking better, Jackson observed, setting down his packages. I feel better, Katherine replied. Mrs. Abernathy has been taking excellent care of me. The housekeeper beamed. She's a model patient, Mr. Everett, not like some I could mention who grumble about staying in bed when they're injured. She gave Jackson a pointed look that made Katherine smile. I brought some things from town, Jackson said, changing the subject. Clothes, mostly. I had to guess at the size, but Mrs. Abernathy can help with alterations. Katherine's eyes widened. That's incredibly thoughtful, but you shouldn't have gone to such expense. Nonsense, he interrupted gently. You can't very well spend the next 2 weeks in my shirt. A blush colored her cheeks at the reminder of her state of undress beneath the blankets. Even so, I insist on repaying you once I'm able to access my funds. We can discuss that later, Jackson said, unwilling to argue the point. For now, I have news. The sheriff and his deputies are investigating where I found you. They might find traces of whoever left you there. Katherine's expression grew serious. Did you send the telegrams? To Cheyenne, Laramie, and Denver, he confirmed. We should hear back tomorrow or the day after, depending on the weather. Mrs. Abernathy, sensing their need for privacy, excused herself to prepare dinner. Once she had gone, Katherine's composed facade crumbled slightly. I remembered more while you were gone, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Fragments, mostly. The argument between Malcolm and Mr. Reed grew heated. Reed accused Malcolm of changing the terms. Malcolm was frightened of him. Jackson sat on the edge of the bed, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Did you hear what these terms were? Katherine nodded, her eyes troubled. Me, they were arguing about me, or rather, about the mining claims. Reed said his employer expected all 3 claims, not just 2, and that I was supposed to have been convinced already. She twisted the bedsheet between her fingers. Jackson, I think they planned to coerce me into signing over my inheritance, and when you wouldn't be coerced. Jackson prompted gently, her eyes met his, filled with the dawning horror of realization. They decided I was an obstacle to be removed. Jackson reached out impulsively, covering her trembling hand with his. Katherine, I promise you this, they won't succeed, not while I'm breathing. The fierce protectiveness in his voice seemed to surprise them both. Katherine turned her hand beneath his, their fingers intertwining naturally. Why are you doing this? She asked softly, taking such risks for a stranger. Jackson considered the question, searching for an answer that wouldn't reveal too much of his own heart, a heart he'd believed permanently scarred after Sarah's death. Because it's the right thing, he finally said. And because when I found you in that snowdrift, something told me you were worth saving, worth protecting. Katherine's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I've never met anyone like you, Jackson Everett. The intimacy of the moment was broken by the sound of Mrs. Abernathy calling them to dinner. Jackson reluctantly released Katherine's hand and stood. You feel strong enough to join us at the table? Mrs. Abernathy could bring a tray. No, Katherine interrupted. I'd like to sit at a proper table, if you'll just help me up. Jackson carefully supported her as she rose from the bed, steadying her when she swayed slightly from the change in position. Her hair smelled faintly of lavender from the soap misses Abernathy had used, and the clean scent mingled with something uniquely Katherine, something that made Jackson's heart beat faster, despite his efforts to maintain composure. As they made their slow way to the dining room, Katherine leaning heavily on his arm, Jackson knew his promise to protect her wasn't merely born from duty or compassion. Something deeper was taking root, something he had neither expected nor sought, but which seemed as inevitable as the changing seasons. Katherine Evans had entered his life like a storm, and Jackson suspected nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the sun glinting off the snow-covered landscape with diamond brilliance. Katherine, who had slept soundly through the night thanks to the doctor's tonic, awoke feeling stronger but still plagued by gaps in her memory. She was sitting by the window in Jackson's room, which he had insisted she continue to occupy while he slept on a cot in his study, when she heard the approach of horses. Fear immediately seized her, but it dissipated when she recognized Sheriff Hayes riding alongside Jackson, who had been checking on his cattle in the north pasture. Katherine watched as the men dismounted and engaged in serious conversation, the sheriff gesturing emphatically while Jackson listened with increasing tension evident in his posture. When they entered the house, Katherine steeled herself for bad news. "Miss Evans," the sheriff greeted her, removing his hat. "Glad to see you recovering." "Thank you, Sheriff," Katherine replied. "I understand you investigated where Mr. Everett found me." Hayes nodded, his expression grave. "We did, madam. Snow had covered most evidence, but we found something you should know about." He glanced at Jackson before continuing. "There was blood on a rock about 20 feet from where you were found, and nearby, tracks of 3 horses in what appeared to be a struggle." Katherine's hand went instinctively to the wound on her head. "You believe I was struck and then dragged to the Snowdrift." "That's how it appears," the sheriff confirmed. "We also found this." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a man's pocket watch, tarnished silver with an ornate monogram. Katherine gasped, recognizing it immediately. "That's Malcolm's. It was a gift from his father." She took it with trembling hands, opening the case to reveal the inscription inside. "To Malcolm Evans, may you always find your way home." Jackson and the sheriff exchanged significant glances. "Miss Evans," Hayes said carefully, "this suggests your cousin might not have been involved in what happened to you. He might be a victim himself." The implication struck Katherine like a physical blow. "You think Malcolm is dead, that this Reed person killed him too?" "It's a possibility we need to consider," Jackson said gently. "The watch was found near signs of a struggle, separate from where I found you." Katherine's mind raced through the fragmented memories. Malcolm had been afraid of Reed, that much she recalled clearly, but had it escalated to murder? "The telegram replies should arrive today," Jackson reminded her. "They might provide more answers." The sheriff replaced his hat. "I've notified neighboring counties to be on the lookout for Reed and the driver Silas. If they're still in the territory, we'll find them." After Hayes departed, Katherine sat in stunned silence, turning Malcolm's watch over in her hands. Despite their disagreements over the mining claims, she had loved her cousin. The thought that he might have died trying to protect her was unbearable. Jackson knelt beside her chair, his presence solid and reassuring. "Katherine, we don't know for certain what happened. Malcolm might have escaped." She looked up, her blue eyes clouded with grief and confusion. "What if I've been wrong about everything? What if Malcolm was trying to protect me from Reed all along?" Jackson covered her hands with his. "Then we'll find out the truth, together." Their moment of connection was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger from town bearing telegram replies. Jackson read them quickly, his expression darkening with each one. "What is it?" Katherine asked anxiously. "The sheriff in Cheyenne reports no sign of Malcolm Evans or William Reed," Jackson began. "However, a man matching Reed's description was seen boarding an eastbound train 2 days ago." "Alone, and Malcolm," Jackson hesitated before continuing. "The Laramie sheriff found the driver Silas dead in a boarding house, throat cut, and my Pinkerton contact says Augustus Blackstone is a mining investor with questionable ethics and connections to organized crime in Chicago. He's been trying to consolidate control of copper mines throughout the territory. Katherine pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a cry of distress. This is all my fault. If I hadn't inherited those claims, no, Jackson said firmly. This is the fault of greedy, violent men who value money above human life, not yours. Before Katherine could respond, they heard the sound of approaching horses, multiple riders moving at speed. Jackson was immediately alert, moving to the window with practiced caution. 5 riders, he reported, his voice tense. Heavily armed, and they're not the sheriff's men. Katherine's heart raced with fear. Reed, stay here, Jackson instructed, retrieving his rifle from above the fireplace. Lock the door behind me. Jackson, no, Katherine caught his arm. You can't face 5 armed men alone, he turned to her, his expression resolute. I've faced worse odds. His voice softened as he added, I made you a promise, Katherine, I won't let them take you. The determination in his eyes left no room for argument. Katherine watched as he checked his rifle and revolver with the efficiency of a man well accustomed to their use. If anything happens to me, he said quietly, there's a trapdoor beneath the rug in my study. It leads to a root cellar with an exit behind the barn. Mrs. Abernathy knows about it. Katherine felt tears spring to her eyes. Don't talk like that, like you're not coming back. Jackson paused at the door, his gaze intense as it held hers. I will come back to you, Katherine, that's another promise. As the door closed behind him, Katherine moved to the window, watching as Jackson positioned himself on the porch, rifle ready. The approaching riders slowed, spreading out in a semicircle before the house. Their leader, a tall man with a shock of red hair beneath his hat, raised his hand in what appeared to be a peaceful greeting. That's not Reed, Katherine murmured to herself, straining to hear the exchange between Jackson and the strangers. Through the glass, she could make out only fragments of conversation. The red-haired man seemed to be asking questions, gesturing occasionally toward the house. Jackson's posture remained defensive, his rifle never wavering from its ready position. After several tense minutes, the riders turned their horses and departed at a casual pace, looking back occasionally as if expecting pursuit. Only when they had disappeared from view did Jackson lower his weapon and return inside. Who were they? Katherine demanded as soon as he entered. Bounty hunters, Jackson replied grimly. Looking for a woman matching your description, claimed there's a reward for information about a missing heiress from Denver. Katherine frowned. I'm not from Denver, I grew up in St. Louis, exactly. These men aren't looking for a missing person, they're hunting you for Blackstone. Jackson ran a hand through his hair, his expression troubled. They said the heiress was wanted for questioning in the murder of her cousin. The accusation struck Katherine like a physical blow. They're framing me for Malcolm's death. It appears so, Jackson confirmed. A perfect way to discredit you if you survive and try to reclaim your mining rights. Katherine sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the elaborate conspiracy against her. What do we do now? Jackson's expression hardened with determination. We fight back, beginning with proving you're not a murderer. The bounty hunter's visit confirmed what Jackson had feared. Katherine wasn't safe, even at his remote ranch. If men were already searching for her with a fabricated story about murder charges, more would follow, and the next group might not leave so peacefully. We need to move you somewhere safer, he decided, gathering maps from his study. I have a line cabin in the mountains about a day's ride from here. It's well-stocked, defensible, and known only to me and my ranch hands. Katherine looked up from Malcolm's watch, which she still clutched tightly. You want me to hide? Just until we can gather evidence against Blackstone and Reed, Jackson explained. My Pinkerton friend is already investigating Blackstone's operations. If we can prove he ordered your murder and possibly Malcolm's, the bounty hunters will have no legal ground to stand on. Katherine's jaw set with determination that matched his own. I won't spend my life running and hiding, Jackson. Those mining claims are my legacy from my father. I won't let criminals steal them through murder and deceit. Jackson smiled slightly, admiring her spirit. I'm not suggesting permanent exile, Catherine, just temporary strategic retreat. His expression grew serious again. These men won't hesitate to kill you if they find you. They've already tried once. Catherine considered his words, then nodded reluctantly. When do we leave? Tomorrow at dawn, Jackson decided. I'll need today to make arrangements, inform my foreman about managing the ranch in my absence, and gather supplies. You're coming with me? Catherine asked, surprise evident in her voice. Did you think I'd send you alone? Jackson's tone was gentle but firm. I told you I wouldn't let you go, Catherine. I meant it. The conviction in his voice caused a flush of warmth to spread through Catherine's chest. In the few days since he'd rescued her from certain death, Jackson Everett had become her protector, her ally, and something more she couldn't quite define, but which made her heart quicken whenever their eyes met. Thank you, she said simply. Knowing the words were inadequate for the risks he was taking on her behalf, Jackson nodded, seemingly understanding all she couldn't express. Rest today, regain your strength, we'll leave before first light. That evening, as Catherine sat before the fire in a dress Mrs. Abernathy had altered for her from one of Jackson's purchases, she wrote in her journal, recording the tumultuous events since her last entry. The act of writing helped organize her fragmented memories and racing thoughts. Jackson entered from outside, bringing with him the crisp scent of winter air. He had spent the afternoon preparing for their journey, checking weapons, packing provisions, and briefing his trusted foreman about his absence. Everything's ready, he announced, removing his coat and hat. Henry will manage things here and relay any news from the sheriff or telegram office. Catherine closed her journal. I've been thinking about Malcolm. If he truly was trying to protect me from Reed and Blackstone, I need to honor his memory by reclaiming what's rightfully mine. Jackson sat opposite her, the firelight casting shadows across his strong features. Those mining claims must be exceptionally valuable for Blackstone to go to such lengths. They are, Catherine confirmed. My father discovered copper deposits richer than any previously found in the territory. He kept the extent of the find secret, revealing it only in his will and private papers left to me. She hesitated before adding, papers that were in my traveling case, which is now presumably in Reed's possession. Jackson frowned. Would those papers allow Reed to claim ownership of the mines? No, Catherine said firmly. The deeds themselves are held in trust by my father's lawyer in St. Louis, but the geological surveys would prove the value of what Blackstone is trying to steal. Which makes you even more of a target, Jackson concluded. The only legitimate claimant standing in their way. Catherine nodded soberly. I never wanted this inheritance, you know. I was content teaching at the Ladies' Academy in St. Louis, but my father insisted I understand the business, prepare to manage it someday. Her voice softened with memory. He said a woman needed independent means to truly be free in this world. Your father sounds like a wise man, Jackson observed. He was. Catherine smiled sadly. He would have liked you, I think. He valued honesty and courage above all else. Jackson seemed almost embarrassed by the implicit compliment. I'm just doing what any decent man would do. No, Catherine contradicted him gently. You're doing far more than most would dare. Taking in a stranger, defending her against armed men, risking your life and livelihood, these aren't the actions of an ordinary man, Jackson. Their eyes met across the space between them, and in that moment, the connection that had been building between them intensified into something neither could deny. Jackson rose from his chair and moved to kneel beside hers, taking her hands in his. From the moment I found you in that snowdrift, he said, his voice low and rough with emotion, I've felt responsible for you, Catherine, but it's become more than responsibility. I need you to know that. Catherine's heart thundered in her chest as she looked into his earnest face. What has it become, then? Jackson struggled to find the right words. I lost someone once, my wife, Sarah. Raiders attacked our first homestead 5 years ago. After that, I never thought I'd feel anything again. He squeezed her hands gently, until I found you. Catherine understood the magnitude of his confession, the risk he was taking in opening his heart again after such loss. I feel it too, she whispered, reaching to touch his face. This connection between us, It defies reason, happening so quickly, but it feels right, Jackson finished for her. It feels right. In the firelit room, with danger lurking beyond the walls of the ranch house, Katherine and Jackson shared their first kiss, tentative at first, then deepening with the intensity of emotions too powerful to contain. When they finally parted, both were breathless, stunned by the overwhelming response they evoked in each other. "We should rest," Jackson said reluctantly, brushing a strand of hair from Katherine's flushed cheek. "Tomorrow will be challenging." Katherine nodded, though letting him go seemed suddenly the most difficult thing she'd ever done. "Good night, Jackson." As she settled into bed that night, Katherine reflected on the extraordinary turns her life had taken. A week ago, she had been traveling with her cousin, worried about business negotiations. Now Malcolm was likely dead, she herself had narrowly escaped murder, and she had found herself falling in love with the man who had rescued her from a snowy grave. Whatever dangers tomorrow might bring, Katherine knew one thing with certainty: Jackson Everett had refused to let her go when he found her barely breathing in that snowdrift, and she, in turn, would refuse to let him go from her heart. They departed before dawn, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten as Jackson helped Katherine mount a sturdy mare he called Willow. Despite the doctor's concerns about her head wound, Katherine insisted she was strong enough to ride, and after some discussion, Jackson had reluctantly agreed it would be faster than using a wagon. "Stay close," he instructed as they set out, leading the way on Thunder. A packhorse followed, laden with supplies. The trail gets narrow in places, and there's still ice beneath the snow. Katherine nodded, concentrating on keeping her seat despite the dull throbbing in her head. The cold air was invigorating, clearing away the lingering fog of confusion that had plagued her since waking in Jackson's home. They traveled in companionable silence for the first few hours, climbing steadily into the foothills. Jackson frequently glanced back, checking both on Katherine and for any signs of pursuit. By midday, they had entered dense pine forest, the trail barely visible beneath the snow. "How much farther?" Katherine asked during a brief rest stop. "Another 3 hours," Jackson replied, helping her dismount. "How's your head?" "Better than expected," she assured him, accepting the canteen he offered. "The fresh air seems to help." Jackson smiled, relaxing slightly. "My line cabin isn't luxurious, but it's solid. Built it myself after." He hesitated. "After Sarah, needed somewhere to be alone with my thoughts." Katherine touched his arm gently. "It must have been devastating losing her that way." "It was," he acknowledged, his gaze distant with memory. "For a long time I was half alive. Going through the motions of living without really feeling anything." He looked at her then, his expression softening. "Until a certain stubborn woman showed up and reminded me what it means to care about someone enough to fight for them." Katherine felt her cheeks warm despite the cold. "I'm not sure showed up is quite how I'd describe being left for dead in a snowdrift." Jackson's answering laugh was unexpected and wonderful, a deep, rich sound that seemed to lighten the air around them. "Fair point, Miss Evans. Let's say fate introduced us in its own dramatic fashion." The moment of levity strengthened the bond between them, making the arduous journey feel almost like an adventure rather than a desperate flight from danger. As they prepared to continue, Jackson suddenly tensed, his hand moving to his rifle. "Get behind that tree," he whispered urgently, indicating a massive pine. "Now." Katherine obeyed without question, leading Willow to cover as Jackson did the same with the other horses. Seconds later, she heard what had alerted him: the distant sound of hoofbeats, multiple riders moving at speed. "Bounty hunters?" she whispered when Jackson joined her behind the tree. "Maybe," he replied grimly, "or Reed's men. Either way, they're following our trail." Katherine's heart raced with fear. "What do we do?" Jackson's eyes narrowed as he calculated their options. "They're still a ways off, but gaining. We need to split up." "No," Katherine protested immediately. "We stay together." "Listen to me," Jackson insisted. "I know these mountains better than anyone. I can lead them away, then circle back to the cabin. You continue on the trail. It's marked with notches on trees, easy to follow. The cabin is stocked with food, water, ammunition." Katherine shook her head stubbornly. It's too dangerous. What if they catch you? Jackson's expression was grim but determined. They won't. And if they follow you instead of me, you'll have a defensible position and enough supplies to last until I get there. Before Katherine could argue further, Jackson pulled her close, his kiss fierce and desperate. Trust me, he murmured against her lips. I will come back to you. With that promise echoing between them, Jackson gave her quick directions to the cabin, then mounted Thunder and headed west, deliberately making a noisy, visible trail that diverged from their original path. Katherine watched him go, fear and admiration warring in her heart. Then, swallowing her trepidation, she mounted Willow and continued north, leading the packhorse and scanning the trees for the notch marks Jackson had described. The next hour passed in tense silence as Katherine followed the subtle trail markers, constantly looking over her shoulder for pursuers. The forest grew denser, the path steeper, and she found herself grateful for Willow's sure-footed nature on the treacherous terrain. When the cabin finally came into view, a solid structure of logs and stone nestled in a small clearing, Katherine nearly wept with relief. She dismounted stiffly, led the horses to a small lean-to stable attached to the cabin, and unsaddled them with hands that trembled from cold and anxiety. Inside, the cabin was simple but surprisingly comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a neatly stacked woodpile beside it. A bed covered in furs occupied one corner, a small table and chairs another. Shelves held provisions, cooking utensils, and, Katherine noted with approval, several books. She quickly set about starting a fire, grateful for the dry kindling and matches Jackson had stored. As warmth gradually filled the space, she attended to the horses once more, ensuring they had water and feed, before returning to the cabin and securing the heavy wooden door. Only then did Katherine allow herself to fully feel the fear that had been her constant companion since Jackson rode away. What if the pursuers caught him? What if they tortured him for her location? What if she never saw him again? Stop it, she told herself firmly, forcing her thoughts away from such dark possibilities. Jackson knew these mountains. He was armed and capable. He would return as promised. To distract herself, Katherine explored the cabin more thoroughly, finding supplies exactly where Jackson had said they would be. A rifle hung on pegs above the fireplace, along with boxes of ammunition. A trapdoor in the floor revealed a small root cellar containing preserved fruits, vegetables, and smoked meat. As night fell, Katherine kept the fire burning low, mindful that too much smoke might attract unwanted attention. She positioned herself by the single window, rifle across her lap, watching the darkened forest for any sign of movement. Hours passed. The moon rose, casting silver light across the snow-covered clearing. Katherine fought against exhaustion, determined to remain vigilant until Jackson returned. When she heard a soft noise outside, she immediately raised the rifle, heart pounding. A shadow moved at the edge of the trees, too large for a deer, too deliberate for a wolf. "Katherine," came Jackson's voice, quiet but clear. "It's me." She nearly sobbed with relief, rushing to unbar the door. Jackson slipped inside quickly, his face drawn with fatigue but his eyes bright with triumph. "They followed me west for miles," he reported, removing his snow-covered coat. "Led them straight into a box canyon, then doubled back while they were still searching it. They won't find this place." Katherine flung her arms around him, heedless of his cold, wet clothing. "I was so worried." Jackson held her tightly, his cheek resting against her hair. "I told you I'd come back." For a long moment, they remained locked in their embrace, drawing strength and comfort from each other. When they finally separated, Jackson moved to the fire, adding logs to build up the heat. "You did well," he said, nodding approvingly at her preparations. "Found everything all right," Katherine nodded. "The cabin is remarkably well equipped." "I believe in being prepared," Jackson replied simply, removing his boots and setting them by the fire to dry. "After Sarah died, I realized how quickly life can change, how vulnerable we all are." Katherine sat beside him, drawn to his warmth and the quiet strength that emanated from him. "Yet you risked everything to help me, a stranger." Jackson turned to her, his expression serious. Not a stranger anymore, Catherine, not for some time now. Their eyes held, the connection between them deepening with each shared moment of danger and trust. Catherine reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "What happens next?" she asked softly. "Tomorrow we rest," Jackson decided. "The day after, I'll ride into the nearest town about 15 miles east and check for messages from the sheriff or my Pinkerton contact. With luck, they'll have evidence against Blackstone and Reed. And if they don't," Jackson's expression hardened, "then we gather the evidence ourselves. Your testimony, the location where you were attacked, Malcolm's watch, it's a start. We build from there until we have enough to bring these men to justice." The conviction in his voice reassured Catherine. For the first time since waking in Jackson's home, she felt a true sense of hope that she might reclaim her life and honor her father's legacy. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing in me, for fighting beside me." Jackson raised their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Always," he promised, "for as long as you'll have me." In that moment, surrounded by wilderness and hunted by dangerous men, Katherine Evans made a decision that would change the course of her life. She leaned forward and kissed Jackson Everett with all the passion and gratitude in her heart, silently vowing never to let him go, just as he had refused to let her go when he found her in that snowdrift. The next day passed in a strange bubble of domesticity, despite their precarious situation. They took turns keeping watch, but no pursuers appeared. Jackson checked and cleaned his weapons while Catherine inventoried their supplies and prepared simple meals from the stored provisions. In the quiet moments between practical tasks, they shared stories of their lives before their paths crossed. Catherine told Jackson about growing up in St. Louis, her years teaching at the Ladies' Academy, and her complicated relationship with Malcolm, who had always been more interested in wealth than in honest work. "He wasn't evil," she explained as they sat before the fire that evening, "just weak. Easily influenced by men like Reed who promised quick fortunes." Jackson, in turn, spoke of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his service during the war, and his journey west with Sarah, seeking a fresh start away from the conflict that had divided the nation. "We were happy here," he said, his voice soft with memory. "For 3 years we built something good together, had plans for children, for expanding the ranch." His expression darkened. "Then the raiders came. I was checking fence lines miles away by the time I got back." Catherine reached for his hand, offering silent comfort. "You survived," she said gently. "You built a new life. Sarah would be proud of the man you've become." Jackson's eyes met hers, filled with emotion. "For years, I thought surviving was enough, existing. Now I realize there's a difference between surviving and truly living." Catherine understood his meaning. Despite the danger surrounding them, she felt more alive in Jackson's presence than she had in years of safe, predictable existence in St. Louis. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden gust of wind that rattled the cabin windows. Jackson rose to check the weather, returning with a concerned expression. "Storms brewing," he reported. "Could delay my trip to town tomorrow." Catherine joined him at the window, watching as dark clouds gathered on the horizon. "Is that normal for this time of year?" "Not unusual," Jackson confirmed, "but potentially dangerous. If it's a heavy snowfall, we could be stranded here for days." Rather than feeling alarmed by this prospect, Catherine found herself almost welcoming it, more time alone with Jackson, away from the complications and dangers awaiting them in the outside world. "Would that be so terrible?" she asked softly, her gaze holding his. Jackson's expression softened as he understood her meaning. "No," he admitted, drawing her into his arms, "not terrible at all." As the first snowflakes began to fall, dancing in the wind outside the window, Jackson and Catherine shared a kiss that held both tenderness and growing passion. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they had warmth, safety, and each other, unexpected gifts in the midst of uncertainty. The storm that swept through the mountains that night proved more severe than Jackson had anticipated. By morning, snow had drifted against the cabin door, and visibility was reduced to mere yards. His planned journey to the nearby town was impossible under such conditions. "We're well supplied," he assured Catherine as they surveyed the white landscape from the cabin window. "And the horses are sheltered. We can wait it out." Catherine nodded, hiding her relief that Jackson wouldn't be venturing into the treacherous weather alone. "How long do these mountain storms typically last?" 2 days, maybe 3, Jackson estimated, sometimes longer in the heart of winter. They settled into a routine defined by the practical necessities of survival, maintaining the fire, caring for the horses, preparing meals, and keeping watch despite the unlikelihood of pursuers braving the blizzard. In the enforced intimacy of the small cabin, their relationship deepened beyond physical attraction or circumstantial alliance. They discussed books they had read, shared philosophical views on life and society, and discovered a mutual love of music. Jackson played the harmonica, and Catherine had a lovely singing voice. On the evening of the second day, as they sat before the fire sharing a simple dinner of venison stew from Jackson's preserved stores, Catherine broached a subject that had been on her mind. "Jackson, if we succeed when we succeed in clearing my name and bringing Blackstone and Reed to justice, what happens next?" He looked up, studying her face in the firelight. "What do you want to happen?" Catherine considered the question seriously. "Before all this, I planned to sell the mining claims and return to teaching. It seemed simpler, safer. And now I'm not certain," she admitted. "My father believed those mines could provide good, fair wages to hundreds of workers if managed properly. He despised the way other mine owners exploited their employees." She hesitated before adding, "But running such an operation would require knowledge I don't possess, and I'm not sure I want to live in a mining camp." Jackson was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "You could hire trustworthy managers, oversee the operation from somewhere more civilized, like Whispering Pine," Catherine suggested, watching his reaction carefully. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "It's a good town, growing, needs a proper school, though." Catherine's heart quickened at the implication. "Are you suggesting I might teach there and manage the mines from a distance?" "I'm suggesting," Jackson said slowly, setting down his cup and taking her hand, "that there might be a future where you don't have to choose between honoring your father's legacy and building a life that brings you happiness." The possibility hung between them, a shared future neither had anticipated when Catherine was left for dead in that snowdrift merely a week ago. "Would that future include a certain rancher?" Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "One who refused to let me go when he found me barely breathing in the snow." Jackson's hand tightened around hers. If that rancher were welcome in such a future, he'd consider himself the luckiest man alive. Catherine moved from her chair to kneel beside him, her face tilted up to his. "He would be more than welcome. He would be essential." The kiss they shared sealed an unspoken promise. Whatever dangers lay ahead, they would face them together, and whatever future emerged from their trials, it would be shared. That night, as the storm howled around the cabin, Catherine and Jackson found solace and joy in each other's arms, their passion both tender and fierce. In the safety of darkness, they expressed with touches and whispered endearments what words alone could not fully convey: the miracle of finding love when least expected, and the determination to hold fast to it against all odds. Morning brought a break in the storm, though heavy clouds suggested it might resume by afternoon. Jackson decided to risk the journey to town, calculating he could make it there and back before the weather worsened again. "I'll be fine," he assured Catherine, who watched anxiously as he prepared thunder for the difficult ride. "The trail is steep but protected from the worst drifts." Catherine handed him a packet of food she'd prepared. "Be careful, those men could still be searching for us." "I'll avoid the main trails," Jackson promised, securing his rifle to the saddle. "And I won't be gone longer than necessary." Their farewell kiss was brief but charged with emotion. As Catherine watched Jackson ride away, disappearing into the trees, she felt a mixture of fear for his safety and hope that his journey might bring news that would help resolve their dangerous situation. Alone in the cabin, Catherine busied herself with practical tasks, tending the fire, checking on Willow and the packhorse and organizing their dwindling supplies. If the storm continued much longer, they would need to consider hunting for fresh meat. By mid-afternoon, snow began falling again, light at first but gradually increasing in intensity. Katherine found herself checking the window with growing frequency, straining to see through the white curtain for any sign of Jackson's return. When dusk approached with no sign of him, Katherine's concern deepened into genuine worry. Jackson knew these mountains intimately. He wouldn't have been caught unprepared by the weather. Something or someone must have delayed him. As full darkness fell, Katherine maintained a vigilant watch, the rifle across her lap. She had stoked the fire higher than usual, hoping its light might guide Jackson home through the storm. Every creak of the cabin, every whistle of wind, caused her to tense in anticipation. It was nearly midnight when she heard the muffled sound of hoofbeats approaching through the snow. Katherine moved to the window, peering into the darkness. A figure on horseback emerged from the trees, moving slowly. Relief flooded through her until she realized the rider was slumped forward in the saddle, barely staying mounted. She grabbed the rifle and rushed to the door, throwing it open despite the gusting snow. "Jackson?" Thunder approached the cabin without guidance, his rider unresponsive. As the horse drew closer, Katherine could see blood staining the snow beneath him, dark droplets falling from Jackson's left arm. Heart pounding with fear, Katherine guided Thunder to the lean-to stable, then helped the semi-conscious Jackson dismount. He was alarmingly pale, his coat torn and bloodied on the left side. "Ambush," he managed to say as she supported him into the cabin. "Reed's men waiting in town." "Hush," Katherine urged, helping him to the bed. "Let me see how badly you're hurt." She worked quickly to remove his coat and shirt, revealing a bullet wound in his upper arm. The bleeding had slowed but not stopped entirely, and Jackson's skin was cold and clammy, early signs of shock. Katherine had never treated a gunshot wound, but she had assisted the school physician during her teaching years and understood the basic principles. Clean the wound, stop the bleeding, prevent infection. Working methodically despite her fear, she heated water, cleaned the area as gently as possible, and determined that the bullet had passed through the fleshy part of Jackson's arm without hitting bone. It was a painful injury, but not immediately life-threatening if she could prevent infection. "You're lucky," she told him as she prepared a poultice from medicinal herbs she'd found among his supplies. "The bullet went clean through." Jackson managed a weak smile. "Doesn't feel lucky." "Tell me what happened," Katherine urged as she applied the poultice and began bandaging his arm. "Who ambushed you?" Jackson grimaced as she tightened the bandage. "Made it to town, checked for telegrams at the general store. There was news, good news. The Pinkertons found evidence linking Blackstone to other murders in mining disputes." He paused, breathing through a wave of pain. "But Reed's men were watching the store, followed me out of town. 3 of them." Katherine's hands stilled. "You fought 3 armed men alone." "Had no choice," Jackson replied. "They wanted to know where you were hiding." Pride flickered in his eyes despite his weakened state. "They didn't get an answer." Katherine blinked back tears of gratitude and concern. "And they shot you." "Just 1 bullet," Jackson said, as if this somehow minimized the danger he'd faced. "Got 2 of them before the 3rd ran off. He'll be back with reinforcements, though. We need to move." "You need to rest," Katherine countered firmly. "You've lost blood and it's still storming. We'll leave at first light." Jackson started to protest but lacked the strength to argue. Katherine helped him drink water mixed with willow bark for pain, then settled him more comfortably on the bed. "Sleep," she instructed, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "I'll keep watch." Jackson caught her hand, holding it against his cheek. "Katherine," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I got the telegram from St. Louis too. Your father's lawyer confirmed the deeds are safe. Reed can't touch the mines without your signature." Relief washed through Katherine at this news, but it was overshadowed by her concern for Jackson. "That's wonderful," she said softly, "but right now all that matters is that you recover." "No," Jackson insisted, his grip tightening on her hand. "What matters is keeping you safe. Reed knows I'm injured. He knows we're in these mountains. They'll come searching at dawn." Katherine straightened her shoulders, determination replacing fear. Then we'll be ready for them. Throughout the night, Katherine maintained her vigil, dividing her attention between watching for intruders and monitoring Jackson's condition. His fever rose slightly but didn't reach dangerous levels, and by morning he was stronger, able to sit up and eat a light breakfast. The storm had passed during the night, leaving a landscape transformed by fresh snow but clear visibility that worked both for and against them. They could see approaching danger, but their tracks would be equally visible to pursuers. "We need to leave," Jackson insisted, standing with effort. "There's another cabin, more remote than this one, used by trappers in the high country. Reed's men won't know about it." Katherine eyed him dubiously. "Can you ride?" "I'll manage," Jackson replied grimly, though his pallor suggested otherwise. They worked together to pack essential supplies, saddle the horses, and erase as much evidence of their presence as possible. Jackson, despite his injury, insisted on carrying his weight, though Katherine noticed how he favored his wounded arm and how each exertion left him more drained. As they prepared to depart, a sound froze them both, distant but distinct. Horses, multiple riders approaching from the direction of town. "Too late," Jackson muttered, moving to the window with his rifle. "They're coming up the main trail." Katherine joined him, counting at least 6 riders moving purposefully through the trees. "Reed's reinforcements, most likely," Jackson confirmed. "We can't outrun them, not with my injury slowing us down." He turned to her, his expression resolute. "You take Thunder, he's fastest. Head west along the ridge. I'll hold them off long enough for you to get clear." "No," Katherine said immediately, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I won't leave you to die for me." Before Jackson could respond, a voice called out from the edge of the clearing, confident, commanding. "Jackson Everett, we know you're in there with the Evans woman. Come out now and no one needs to get hurt." Jackson's jaw tightened. "William Reed," he confirmed in a low voice. "I recognize him from the sheriff's description." Katherine peered through the window, studying the man who had orchestrated her attempted murder. Reed was expensively dressed despite the frontier setting, with an air of authority that suggested he was accustomed to being obeyed. "What do we do?" she whispered. Jackson assessed their options quickly. The cabin's defensible, thick logs, one entrance, good sight lines, but they outnumber us and they'll eventually try to smoke us out or set the place on fire. "So we fight," Katherine concluded, reaching for the second rifle. Jackson looked at her with a mixture of pride and concern. "Katherine, I won't be a passive victim again," she interrupted. "My father taught me to shoot. I can help defend us." A grim smile touched Jackson's lips. "All right then. Take position by the east window. I'll cover the door and south window. Aim for the horses first without mounts. They're stranded in deep snow." As they took their positions, Reed called out again. "Last chance, Everett. Send out the woman and you can ride away from this." Jackson's response was a carefully aimed shot that struck the ground directly in front of Reed's horse, causing the animal to rear in panic. The message was clear. The next shot wouldn't miss. What followed was a tense standoff that escalated into sporadic gunfire. Reed's men sought cover behind trees, occasionally firing at the cabin windows but hesitant to charge across the open clearing. Jackson and Katherine returned fire selectively, conserving ammunition while keeping their attackers at a distance. Despite her limited experience, Katherine proved a capable shot, winging one of Reed's men when he attempted to circle behind the cabin. Jackson, even injured, was deadly accurate, driving back several attempts to rush the door. As midday approached, a new sound reached them: hoofbeats, many of them approaching rapidly from the east. Jackson tensed, fearing Reed had called in even more reinforcements. "Katherine," he said urgently, "if they overwhelm us, there's a trapdoor under the bearskin rug. It leads to a tunnel that comes out behind the stable. Promise me you'll use it." Before she could respond, a voice shouted from the new arrivals, not Reed's cultured tones, but the gruff authority of Sheriff Hayes. "William Reed, you're surrounded. Drop your weapons and surrender." Katherine rushed to the east window, relief flooding through her as she saw the sheriff and at least a dozen armed men emerging from the trees, rifles trained on Reed and his remaining men. The sheriff, she breathed, hardly daring to believe their luck. But how did he know? Jackson leaned heavily against the wall, his strength finally flagging after hours of tension and blood loss. The telegram, he explained, must have mentioned I was injured. Hayes would have gathered a posse as soon as he heard. Outside, Reed and his men were slowly lowering their weapons, recognizing the futility of their position. Katherine unbarred the cabin door, helping Jackson to a chair before stepping onto the porch, rifle still in hand but pointed downward. "Sheriff Hayes," she called. "We're grateful for your timely arrival," the sheriff nodded grimly. "Miss Evans, glad to see you alive." He gestured to his deputies to secure Reed and the others. "Got a telegram from the federal marshal in Denver yesterday. Seems Mr. Reed here is wanted for multiple counts of fraud, extortion, and now attempted murder." Reed, his hands being bound behind him, glared at Katherine with undisguised hatred. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he spat. "Blackstone has connections everywhere. This isn't over." "Actually, Mr. Reed," Katherine replied calmly, "it is over. Your employer's connections are being rounded up as we speak, according to the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Your mining scheme has failed." As Reed was led away, Sheriff Hayes approached the cabin. Everett inside. "Telegram said he was shot." Katherine nodded, standing aside to let the lawman enter. "He needs medical attention, but the wound isn't life-threatening." Inside, Jackson had managed to stand, though he leaned heavily on the table for support. "Sheriff," he greeted Hayes with a nod. "Your timing is impeccable. Wouldn't have found you at all if not for your ranch hand, Henry," Hayes replied. "Smart fellow remembered this cabin when we came looking after getting that telegram." Over the next hour, the sheriff's men secured the prisoners and prepared for the journey back to town. A deputy with medical training properly dressed Jackson's wound, declaring it would heal cleanly with proper care. As the group prepared to depart, Sheriff Hayes addressed Katherine and Jackson. "Federal marshal will want statements from both of you. And Miss Evans, your father's lawyer is apparently on his way from St. Louis to assist with securing your mining interests." Katherine nodded, the full impact of their ordeal and its resolution finally beginning to register. "Thank you, Sheriff, for everything." Once the lawmen had departed with their prisoners, Katherine and Jackson found themselves alone again in the cabin, the sudden quiet almost disorienting after the chaos of the morning. "It's over," Katherine said softly, hardly able to believe it. "Really over." Jackson reached for her hand, drawing her close. "Your father's legacy is safe. You can decide what to do with those mines on your own terms now." Katherine looked up at him, her heart full of emotions too complex for simple words. "Our terms," she corrected gently. "If you meant what you said before the attack." Jackson's free hand cupped her cheek, his eyes serious despite his exhausted state. "Every word," he promised. "Whatever future you choose, Katherine Evans, I want to be part of it if you'll have me." Katherine's answer was a kiss that conveyed all the love, gratitude, and hope that had blossomed between them in the midst of danger and uncertainty. When they parted, both were smiling despite the challenges still ahead: Jackson's recovery, Katherine's legal battles to secure her inheritance, the process of building a life together from the unexpected foundation laid when he found her barely breathing in a snowdrift and refused to let her go. "We should head back to your ranch tomorrow," Katherine suggested, helping Jackson to the bed. "Once you've rested properly." Jackson nodded, not arguing for once about his need for recovery. "And then," Katherine sat beside him, taking his hand in hers. "And then we begin our future, whatever shape it takes, together." In the warm safety of the cabin, with danger finally behind them, they spoke of possibilities: Katherine managing her father's mines ethically while establishing a school in Whispering Pine, Jackson expanding his ranch with the security of her financial support, a home large enough for the family they both hoped to create. Dreams that had seemed impossible just days ago now felt within reach, transformed by the power of a love neither had sought but both had embraced with courage and conviction. As spring transformed the Wyoming landscape, melting away the last traces of the winter that had nearly claimed Katherine's life, She stood on the porch of Jackson's ranch house, now their shared home, watching as workers constructed the town's first proper schoolhouse on land they had donated. "It's coming along nicely," Jackson observed, joining her and sliding an arm around her waist. His wounded arm had healed completely, leaving only a scar to remind them of their ordeal. "Just in time for the fall term," Katherine agreed, leaning into his embrace. The mining families are particularly excited. Many of their children have never had formal education. In the months since Reed's capture and Blackstone's subsequent arrest, Katherine had worked tirelessly to transform her father's mining operations into models of ethical industry. Workers received fair wages and safe conditions, and a portion of profits went toward community improvements in the towns surrounding the mines. Jackson had been her steadfast partner through it all, offering practical advice about Western business practices and unwavering support when she faced resistance from other mine owners accustomed to exploitation rather than fairness. Their wedding 3 months earlier had been a joyous community celebration, with Sheriff Hayes giving the bride away and Mrs. Abernathy weeping happy tears throughout the ceremony. The simple gold band on Katherine's finger caught the sunlight as she wrapped her arms around her husband's neck. "I received a letter from my father's lawyer today," she told him. "The last of Blackstone's legal challenges has been dismissed. The mines are officially secured in our name." Jackson smiled, pride evident in his expression. "Your father would be so proud of what you've accomplished, Katherine. Taking what could have been just personal wealth and using it to improve hundreds of lives." "Our accomplishment," she corrected gently, a habit she had developed whenever Jackson downplayed his role in their shared enterprises. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." Their kiss was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Katherine looked up to see Henry, now their foreman, riding in with several ranch hands returning from the north pasture. "Cattle all accounted for, Mr. Everett," Henry called, "and that new breeding bull is settling in just fine." Jackson acknowledged the report with a nod, his attention already returning to his wife. In the domestic rhythm they had established, afternoons were for ranch business, evenings for reviewing mining reports and school plans, and nights for each other for the love that had blossomed in the most unlikely circumstances and grown stronger with each passing day. Later, as twilight painted the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, Katherine and Jackson sat together on the porch swing, watching as stars appeared one by one above the distant mountains. "I was thinking," Katherine said, her voice slightly hesitant, "about expanding the house before winter." Jackson looked at her curiously. "Any particular reason?" Katherine took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "We'll need more room in about 7 months." Jackson's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to pure joy in the space of a heartbeat. "Katherine," he breathed, pulling her into his arms. "Are you certain?" She nodded, her own happiness mirrored in his eyes. "Dr. Morgan confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby, Jackson." His kiss was tender, reverent almost, as if she had given him a gift beyond price. In many ways, Katherine reflected, they had given each other such gifts, second chances at love, at family, at creating a legacy worth passing to future generations. "Boy or girl doesn't matter," Jackson said, his voice thick with emotion. "As long as they have your courage and determination." Katherine smiled, thinking of the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment of perfect happiness. "And your compassion," she added. "Your willingness to risk everything for a stranger you found barely breathing in the snow." Jackson's arms tightened around her. "Best risk I ever took," he murmured against her hair. "Finding you, refusing to let you go, I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." As night settled fully over the Wyoming wilderness, Katherine Evans Everett rested securely in the embrace of the man who had saved her life in more ways than one. From the brink of death in a silent snowdrift to the promise of new life growing within her, their story had come full circle, a testament to the enduring power of love discovered in the most desperate of circumstances. In the years that followed, as their family grew to include 3 children who inherited their mother's intelligence and their father's strength of character, Katherine and Jackson would often share the story of their beginning, how fate, in its wisdom, had brought together two souls destined to heal each other's wounds and build a shared future from the ashes of loss and betrayal. And always, the most important part of the tale was the moment when Jackson Everett, finding a stranger barely breathing in a snowdrift, had made a promise that would shape both their destinies. "I've got you now. I won't let you go." A promise kept through danger and triumph, through joy and challenge, through all the seasons of a love as enduring as the mountains that had witnessed its birth.